Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Searching the Sacred. Lisa, Steph, and Jason with you again. This is episode 89, I think, on the total list of episodes. So if you are new to the podcast, you got a lot of listening to do. But for all of you that have been joining us this season, season 12, this is episode 6, and this season is being titled The Assignment Hasn't Changed, because we're looking over this Hebrew scriptures, the New Testament, things that Jesus said and others, where we are recognizing that the call to follow Christ, the call to be this dust and divine human being is this unique thing that the prophets talked about, the law of Moses talked about, and Jesus emphasized and lived out in its fullness all the way through the cross and resurrection. And so we are checking out what that assignment is, and then asking the question, what does it mean for us to live into it today? And so with that, we're going to be diving into the book of Matthew, where we're going to be seeing Jesus sitting at a table and asking the question, well, who's at his table, and why is that significant, and how does that impact the assignment that we have as we are sitting at tables ourselves? So with that, Matthew chapter 9, Lisa.
I'm going to start at verse 9, and I'm going to read to verse 13. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners."
All right. What do we think? What does this say about our assignment, I guess, or Jesus? Or one of the things I'm struck by right now as I was looking at my Bible, I'll start. And I am thrown by the fact that in Matthew, this tax collector's name is Matthew, but in Luke and in Mark, the name is Levi. And that feels like very different names. And I'm curious about that, but that might be a distraction from the conversation. So that's my current distraction is his name Matthew or Levi or both? And do I have both names? And I think in part because this is the section, it's only in Matthew that it says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. All of the versions say I've called the sick need a physician. I've come to call the sinners. Like that's it. But this is the one that says the Hosea 6 passage. And I'm curious about that because Levi would be the name of a priestly role. And that's not the name used here. So I'm on a mental tangent right now. That's where I am. How's everybody else doing?
That's funny. Yeah, you were like 8 steps down the rabbit hole already. And
yeah. My brain moves fast.
it was because you were like your opening question was like, so what do you think? What are your first reactions? And you're like, but before you say anything, let me just dive right down in. Like, wow. Great ponderings. I have not. I think you're bringing to light a lot of really unique things. Let me just say it that way. You're diving really deep, but what you're really highlighting is that the uniqueness of the name may impact how we read what's going on in the interaction. And what's unique about the Matthew version is that it has this reflection from Hosea, I think chapter 6, if I'm not mistaken, where I desire mercy, not sacrifice, which is a unique part of this story and this version of the story that we get. So what is unique about Matthew? What is unique about the highlighting Hosea? Why is Jesus saying that? I think just on the surface level, I think it's unique that Jesus calls this tax collector to follow him, and then immediately he does, like as if there's no hesitation, like, Sure, I'll go follow around a poor rabbi as opposed to being a rich tax collector, no problem. That seems abrupt. Why would someone do that? Secondly, Jesus is like at a dinner party where there happens to be tax collectors and quote unquote sinners, which is an interesting term to call a group of people, whatever that group is comprised of. That dinner party also happens to be a dinner party with Pharisees at it, which is intriguing. And then the Pharisees seem to be talking to Jesus as if the other people aren't even in the room, which they could clearly hear the conversation. And so, how arrogant and, jerkish is that? And so, there's a lot of interesting table dynamics happening at this dinner party.
I feel like two things have come to mind. One is that, growing up in the like Calvinistic tradition, I'm like, well, we're all sinners, so I guess we're all sitting at that table. So I don't know what's so jarring about it. That's what we should be. It's like that. Like, I don't struggle there very much. Like, well, it's all of us. Duh. And then I also have like the voice.
The author of Matthew had Calvin in mind when he wrote tax collectors and all of humanity.
That's how they worked, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's good.
And then I think I have Amy Jill Levine's voice saying, like, just be careful, like how much we're interpreting the Pharisaical tradition of what's happening and what's the call out. And I think also kind of playing with the idea, like if Jesus is a Pharisee, then how does that change how I'm reading this conversation too? And I'm still like struck at the Matthew thing of like, well, whether it's Matthew, Levi, whatever, whoever it is, that Jesus is like, yeah, come on. And they're like, yeah, okay, I'm going to leave my booth. Real good. Like, what? Like, I'm going to need more.
Yeah. Especially like when we really think about what it is to like leave a tax collector's booth, that is just quite the defiance of Rome. Like you're not just leaving your job as a barista at Starbucks. Like that would be a big enough deal. Like that would still be a big deal to just walk out of a job. But to walk out of a job where your job is to collect money for the Roman Empire, that just feels like it has some ramifications.
Well, and it's different because some people might be like, well, I wouldn't want to work for the IRS. Okay, it's not the IRS. This is like working at a job where it's like working on Wall Street and you're like a day trader, or like you're making big. These are some of the richest people in the empire, especially in a subjugated people group. They are giving an opportunity for wealth that very few people, if anyone in their community, has access to. And so it's a very big job. And yes, you're working for the Romans collecting taxes, but you also have the support of Rome collecting taxes, which means you're carrying a lot of power, you're carrying a lot of influence, you're carrying a lot of wealth, generational wealth, likely for your family. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Just to highlight, as we think about those differences between, like, just some of the things that have already been said, I want to pull a couple things together. One of the reasons to be in Matthew as we're in this series of The Assignment Hasn't Changed is Matthew, as a gospel writer, really does a lot to quote the Hebrew scriptures and help make it clear how it is one story. And so that is a part of, I think, why it is unique here that he's quoting Isaiah, because that's a part of what Matthew does as a gospel writer. Whereas Luke is writing to a Gentile audience, it matters to him less to quote and pull forward. And so it makes sense that Matthew's doing that, and it helps us in this thought of how is this trajectory that Jesus is on actually connected to everything that came before, and Matthew is guiding the way with that. And then his name in Matthew, it's still a Hebrew name, Metayah, which is gift of Yah, gift of the Lord, gift of the living presence, gift of God, that perhaps matters for like maybe there's a gift that he is giving to us in the way he's writing it. But it also means this version of it is his firsthand account of it. Whereas the Luke version of it, the Mark version of it would be whatever they heard from, like in theory, at least in the way that it's being presented as a gospel, is this is written by Matthew and this is Matthew's story that he's writing. So what is he including in his own story uniquely? And then from what Lisa already brought up, and like what you brought up with the Pharisees also being at this table, Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg has a really compelling set of 3 posts. Look it up if you have not read it before, listeners. That Jesus, arguing that Jesus was a Pharisee, and that's why he's around Pharisees so much, is because Pharisees hang out with each other and wrestle things out. They're arguing, they're trying to figure out how it all works, and they hang around with each other a lot, discussing the law, discussing how to apply the law. And so if the Pharisees are at this table, that actually probably upholds the argument that Jesus is a Pharisee. That's why they're at the table. They're all hanging out together, figuring out how to live life. And they're actually then just wrestling right in front of everybody else who's there with like, what do we do about these other people who are there? And so I think it's interesting to consider him as a Pharisee as they're having that discussion. And I think, again, there's a compelling argument to had there. And then the one other thing I'm going to put out there with him being a Pharisee for this discussion is that also makes it feel different to me that he's quoting Hosea 6:6, because I desired chesed is the word in Hebrew and not sacrifice is about the temple, which is about priests, not Pharisees. And we tend to lump all of these things together like all religious leaders are one, but actually Pharisees and priests often disagreed with each other in the first century for what it looked like to live out faith under Roman rule. And so I don't actually know that it would be controversial amongst that audience to say I desire mercy over sacrifice, because I feel like all the Pharisees would be like, here, here. It's not about the temple, it's about the law. But yet he's also still pushing on what it means for it to be about something other than the temple. And so those are all my circulating thoughts that in my mind tie together. But I also feel like I have already shown this morning in our recording that I am a little scattered. I think so. I don't know if it sounded tied together outside of my head. It felt tied together in my head.
No, you're good. Yeah, I think it's interesting that we often read that I desire mercy, not sacrifice, as kind of like Jesus trying to like kind of get them. Like, ooh, he said something that made them put them in their place. And what you're maybe bringing up is like, well, maybe they actually would already agree with that, and he was reminding them of where they're at. Like, hey, don't forget who you are. Like, think about it. Think about who you are. You're Pharisees. You actually like this idea of mercy, and not just the sacrificial system that has to take place at the temple with the high priest. So, like, I'm doing what we always said we were going to do as a little cool group of Pharisees.
The thing they would probably be more disturbed by is the second part of I came to not to call the righteous, but the sinners to repentance, because the Pharisees are really trying to build righteousness in the people. And so like there's a tension there of what does building righteousness look like? Who is being called? How do we do that? Is Matthew too far out to be pulled back in?
Mm-hmm. I kind of see it like you have a group of people that all have a similar worldview, mindset, calling, however you want to put it. And here comes someone who feels really connected to that way of being in the world. And yet they kind of don't always want to be in that world. And the group is like, well, come on, like, just hang out here. Just go to school here. Just work here. Like, come be a part of the cool conference here. Come be a part of the thing that's happening here, because we love what you're saying. We love what you're up to. We love, like, you're one of us. Like, and you're so cool. You're gonna make us feel even cooler. Like, so come do the thing with us. And Jesus is like, no, like, yeah, I am one of you. I'm here to talk about this stuff, but you're not the audience. You don't need it. Like, why would I go hang out with a whole bunch of doctors when there's a whole bunch of sick people and I'm a doctor? Like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to go do that. Like, I could go to the conference. I could go and sit and listen to the lectures. I could go and, write the papers for the journals, or I could just go cure diseases and give eye surgery to people in the developing world and all that. I could go do Doctors Beyond Borders or something as opposed to hanging out with y'all and writing papers. And
Mhm.
sorry, I don't mean to disparage doctors that write papers. We need more research grants, and our federal government seems to be taking those away at this moment. And so shame on them. But you get my point.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's maybe part of the challenge here is towards religious leaders and saying, how are you spending your time and who are you spending your time with? Are you more likely to be at a table like Jesus is here? Or are you more likely to be at some conference filled with other pastors? Um,
Mhm.
because that's the kind of conversation he's having with the Pharisees of like, no, this table is where we should be. And they're not sure about that. And how is that a call for all religious leaders across time to think about who am I spending my time with? Why am I spending my time there? Where would Jesus be spending his time?
Well, I think it's interesting because he doesn't tell them to leave. He's
Mm-mm.
not saying, I don't want you here.
Mhm.
He's just saying, I'm not called to just your table.
Mhm.
I'm called to this table, which you are also at.
Mhm.
It's a bigger table than what you maybe thought it was.
Mhm.
I also think it's interesting as we think about. I'm very curious who the sinners are in this passage. Lisa already brought that up, but it's just such an interesting word to use and to separate it from the tax collectors. Why are they talking about the tax collectors and the sinners as two separate categories as compared to just calling them all sinners?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And then what does that say about who those sinners are and what they're concerned about and who is Jesus really with here? And I think I've tended to at least assume every time the Bible is talking about sinners in the gospels, it's talking about prostitutes. But sin here, what's the Greek word again? Hold on.
Martia.
Yes, there we go. Um, and it's hamartolos when it's sinners, when it's talking about it as a label. That really it's then that idea is people who miss the mark. That's what sin is. You miss the mark. So it could be prostitutes, 100%. It could be somebody who didn't observe Torah correctly. It could be somebody who that's a really broad category actually, and it's sort of affirming what Lisa said about the Calvinistic thing. There's so many ways to sin. This could be who's not a sinner? What sin are they concerned about that's in the room that they're calling it as sinners?
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't know, maybe what sin it makes me think about what sin would we be concerned about Jesus hanging out with? Who has missed the mark in our world and our culture where if we saw Jesus at that table, we would be like, huh, Jesus, why are you hanging out with that person who missed it? Lisa, you have a thought on that? You made a little face.
Oh, that's just because there's a hierarchy of forgivable sins, forgivable
Mhm.
crime, and there's expectations around those things. And if Jesus was hanging out with, um, yeah, I mean, I feel like anybody who has been has well, has a sex crime of sorts. Those are folks that we would be certainly jarred by Jesus being with.
Mhm.
And I mean, the idea of showing them Hesed,
Mm.
I think feels pretty foreign
Mm.
to us personally. And even maybe even thinking that they deserve it from anyone.
Mm.
Think about there's sometimes where some of the folks I work with have crimes that have a lot of published conversations, in newspapers and whatnot. And a lot of the comments are, let them burn. There should be a death penalty. Um, and they've caused significant harm. that just exists,
Mm.
no matter like where we are on the spectrum of there's significant harm done, and most people want retaliation for that. They want um, more than an eye for an eye. They want retribution. So
Maybe that's a part of why it's just listed as the sinners category here, is that it's an invitation for us to wrestle with who would we be bothered by being at that table? Because it might be, because what do we think is unforgivable, or where we would just distrust Jesus through hanging out with that person.
I mean, I kind of think too, like, but that kind of places us in the position of Pharisee, right? Which may not be wrong. We could certainly be in the position of Pharisee in this conversation. But I also feel like it's the invitation to see yourself seated next to folks like that, right? The invitation, like if we see ourselves as someone who has, I don't know, like sinner is such a big damn title. I like person centered, like person first language. So if we consider ourselves people who have sinned, are sinning, will sin, that the understanding is that we're going to also be next to people who have sins that look different than us. And do we want Jesus to be at the table for all of us? Or are we trying to create spaces where it's just for me and the other people who say really crappy things about people sometimes, who hold a lot of anger and frustration towards, like I think this is that whole, where I twist the word righteous. I don't think it's the same meaning, but like when you have that righteous feeling of like, I don't want to be with my sin's not that bad. My stuff is not that bad. So I wouldn't be at the same table as that. I'd be I'm at a different sinner's table.
Like, I mean, I think that's a really good wrestle, right? How does it affect how we read this passage to think about ourselves as a disciple who just had to welcome Matthew? I mean, that might be a thing for some of us. If we think of ourselves as Matthew, who was just welcomed as a disciple, if we think of ourselves as Pharisees who are watching all this take place, or if we think of ourselves as one of those sinners at the table who may have mixed feelings about being with the other sinners at the table or being called a sinner. And that there's probably something different to be gleaned as we think about ourselves in each of those different positions. And one of them might be really what we need to hear and pay attention to today. And another might be really what we need to hear and pay attention to tomorrow. I think it's probably helpful to unpack some of the language a little bit. I want to spend some time on the mercy, not sacrifice, because I think it's a big verse and it's important. But he also is saying here, I have come not to call the righteous, but the sinners to repentance. And all of those are such big churchy words. I kind of want to say it with translation instead of with the word. So righteous is dikaios, which is righteous, but it's also like everywhere in Plato's Republic that's referred to as just and justice. And so sometimes we don't hear righteousness and justice as the same idea, but biblically they are the same idea. So you could easily say, I've not come to call the just, who are, so it is about divine laws, but it's also about integrity and uprightness and keeping doing what is right and good in the world. I've come not to call those people who are already doing what is right and good in the world, but those who have missed the mark towards turning and changing their mind. So that's really the idea of sinning and repentance. We already talked about hamartolos, being a sinner, means you've missed the mark. But repentance is metanoia, which is to change your mind. So what is it to call not those who already see themselves as doing the just and right thing, but those who have missed the mark and know they need to change their mind? And what is it for all of us to see ourselves as people who have missed the mark and need to change our mind?
I got curious about to call, because I was like, what does that mean to call? Like, because in my head, I feel like I hear a lot of like, that language of like a calling,
Mhm.
right? And so I was like, is that what it's hinting at? Is that the thing? But it was interesting to me because there is something about something in a loud voice or inviting someone, but it's also to give a name to, like it's either to name someone or call their name or to receive a
Mhm.
name.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting if like I'm here to call those names.
Mhm.
It felt much more like that felt like a personal, like that feels like being seen, but not in a way that feels like disparaging, but as a way of like, I see you. And I know, I don't know, there's something in that for me that felt a little bit different than just this idea that like he's calling everybody to mission,
Mhm.
which is I think what I usually read that as.
Mhm. Yeah, like is part of why if we take that back to verse 9 and the calling of Matthew, like we tend to think of it as this really when follow me and he arose and followed him. But like what if part of it was just that Jesus made eye contact with him and saw him and like really saw him and called he didn't really know what he was being called to yet. He just knew that somebody called him.
Well, I mean, and to sit into to Matthew's, like, I don't know, like maybe Matthew loved making the money. Maybe that part is all true. But on some levels, I do think that that could be a very lonely existence of like if everybody you see hates you and is giving you money that they don't have or they don't want to give, and you just have like you're living into the reputation of the thing that's always been set before you. They probably don't call you Matthew. Um, and to think about like if a person, whether I mean maybe Matthew knew about him and had heard stories and that kind of thing, and all those things exist in there. But to have a person that shows up and is just like, even just says, "Hi, Matthew," feels like that could be like it could disrupt your day in a way that would be very different than
Hmm.
normal day. If that's maybe it's disarming.
Mhm.
Or you know how, okay, I don't know if this is the right thing. It just reminded me of it, so I'm going to say it. But you know how, like, if you are like driving and you have like, not like road rage, but like you get frustrated, somebody does something, or like you cut somebody else off, they cut you off, something happens, and like you're so angry, but then like you see the person and it ends up like being somebody you know.
Mhm.
And then you're like, oh, oh, like you see them. They're not like this other, like you can, like you would not feel that settled if it was somebody you didn't know or somebody that didn't look like what you think they should look like or whatever.
Mhm.
There's somebody that you don't like how they drive.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, like I think about like when you feel seen and known versus,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. I just, that was my,
Yeah.
it
That's
was,
funny.
I was feeling that moment.
Have you had road rage incident recently that we need to talk about, Lisa?
No, but my son almost got schmucked, and then it turned out it was by a friend.
Oh, that's funny.
And like that whole like it played out like live time where I
Yeah.
was
Uh-huh.
like, oh, oh, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I um I keep thinking about Richard Rohr and that um I think one of the things he has modeled well, at least in his language, but it seems like in his life, is he is a person, I think, like the Pharisees, where people put him on a pedestal because he is a leader that people respect and follow. And that's even a part of why, like, I'm thinking about you, Lisa, and how, like, you don't not like him, but you don't like how people follow him, right? Like, that is that fair to say? I'm putting words in your mouth.
Okay, I'll take it.
Okay.
Similar.
Um,
Close enough.
yeah. But what I really respect is he also is nervous about that. Right? Like, and part of what happens with this pedestaling of people is how does the person being put on this pedestal respond to being put there? And the Pharisees were people who would have been put on a pedestal by the people in their lifetime as like, oh, these are the righteous ones. These are the whatever. And what Rohr talks about was that he realizes the golden shadow of that like it is actually not healthy to be pedestaled, and that he then asks. I don't know if he still does this, but he wrote about at one point that he asked to be humiliated every day in order for himself to not put himself on a pedestal, that at least he could do that work. And I'm thinking about the Pharisees here and that dynamic as like they are people who've been pedestaled by the people around them. And they're looking at Jesus like, why are you with the sinners? And they could have asked a totally different question than that. And how does that reveal their lack of seeing themselves as somebody who need their mind changed, their lack of seeing themselves as a sinner who's at the same table, the lack of that humility in themselves. It's like it kind of sounds like they're believing their own hype. And that's a part of what Jesus is pushing on is like, you're at this table too, which means you're also a person who needs to change your mind. You're also a person who needs to pay attention and not, and even the fact that like there's something about that I think I'm seeing in that pedestaling dynamic with the fact that the Pharisees aren't asking Jesus about it. So in verse 11, when the Pharisees they say to Jesus's disciples, why is Jesus doing this? And there's something in that still feels like they don't want to take the risk of the direct challenge and the direct response. That feels like they don't want to risk being humiliated or having their mind changed, or maybe they're asking for a different reason, but that's what I'm seeing, and like why they're asking the disciples and not Jesus. Like they don't. What do they not want to be challenged on? What position do they not want to lose? You're holding back a thought, Lisa. Jason sees it too. He just nodded.
There's a little bit of conviction in it, I think, right now. I just was like as I was playing with the scenario in my head, because I was like, well, what if the Pharisees are really like, hey, why is your teacher doing this? Like, not so ill-spirited, but like more of like, hey, what you're following this guy? What's going on? Like, what is this? But I also was thinking about like, is Jesus's response like that Jesus is frustrated because they didn't just ask Jesus directly? Like that Jesus would have really would have preferred they come directly to him. And I think that's the space that I was like, oh, I think because sometimes I'm really hard on communities, like evangelical communities, because I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you blindly following this person? Like, I don't think they're trustworthy. I think they're spewing things that aren't correct or whatever. And maybe I need to be more careful on how that is. Like, is there a conviction in there of, yeah, maybe that conversation needs to be more geared towards the people who are leaders. Like we talk a lot about Christian nationalism, and it's a lot of people in it, but who's leading that and who's having those conversations? And I don't know. This is really swirly. This is a very live time, like me like wrestling through like how I read something and then what I try to find for myself in it. Because I feel like if I'm not finding something for me to wrestle with, if I'm just like, oh, this is for somebody else out here, I'm not doing the work that I need to do. And so like when I'm trying to pull in, I can read this as both it being Jesus being very like direct and frustrated with the Pharisees, but I also can see it as being a little bit of an invitation of like, that's not what this is. This is what I'm here for. This is my work. That's why I'm doing this. And I don't like, there's not like then the conversation shifts. I don't hear like the Pharisees going like, oh my God, what a jerk he was, and like leaving or storming out. What if they stayed? I don't know.
Well, and some do, right? I mean, some Pharisees do stay and follow and become disciples in a way. Others just kind of go about their business, and then others plot to kill him. So I think there is a variety of responses you can have. One of the other things I think is kind of interesting about this, and maybe this is taking us in a tangent, but Jesus ends with, "For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." I have heard my entire life, Jesus came for everyone. Jesus saves everyone. And I don't believe that to be untrue suddenly.
Mhm.
But if the goal is just to get people to follow Jesus so that they can go to heaven when they die, Jesus is pretty bad at it, to be quite honest, because he really should be the best Pied Piper ever. He really should have the biggest following. He really should have, and not just like now, like with the way the church and history has propped him up, but like while he was on the planet, he should have been like, you know, I'm the thing. Come, come, come.
Mhm.
And yet here he is saying, well, I'm not here for people that are just. Like, I'm not here for people that are following the rules and actually living into the healthy way of human flourishing that has been the assignment all along. I'm
Mhm.
here for those that have missed the mark and need to change the way they think and get back on the right path, right? Like if we're going to use the Hebrew, repent, it's return to the good path, right? As opposed to the deviated path that you've found yourself on. Okay. I There's a part of me that really resonates with that as a pastor who it's not that we are all about just wanting people to do good in the world, because we can easily leave spirituality behind when we are all about just doing good or being socially just or whatever. But we also just can't sit in our ivory towers of faith or university of learning and knowledge and never do good in the world. Like, the point is to be a transformed human being that shows up in the world and is loving kindness and not just appeasing the religious rules of sacrifice. It's to actually show up and exude the ideal way of being human and being in relationship that God has designed, right? That's what that Hesed is all about. It's that beautiful word that's undefinable in the English language because it's ideal relationship with God and humanity, right? Like, live into that. And I think if within that there's always a call to repentance. There's always a call to following Jesus. But if you're doing that, it's almost like just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. And when you find that you've missed the mark, I'm right here to say, okay, now I'm here. Now I'm here for you. Like, now you need a little Jesus flavoring. Like, come on, let's go. Get back on the path. Because the goal isn't just say this, go here when you die. It's flourishing of humanity. Like, that's the goal.
Yeah, I mean, that hits it like, okay, so if the idea is the assignment hasn't changed, what has the call always been that Jesus is doing? And what if it's not? What if it's never been about getting to heaven? And it's still not with Jesus because he's not talking about the goal is to be righteous or to have the right. What if the goal is something else? And a part of the goal he's pointing to that has always been true is this idea of chesed in Hosea 6:6. So the prophets have such an
I
interest.
think you just kicked the tires right off the bus of heresy there. But that was pretty cool. Keep going.
Well, so like, Jesus talks a lot about this kind of thing, about the kingdom is here, like it's not just about some afterwards thing. And that comes from the Hebrew scriptures as well, where all over the language of the prophets it almost sounds contradictory to the language of the Torah, unless you're reading the Torah thoughtfully and slowly and carefully. So the Torah has a lot of laws in it, has a lot of things that you're supposed to do. And the prophets over and over again say, those things that I told you you're supposed to do, I don't want them. So like either God is contradicting God's self, like I don't want your fasts, Isaiah 58. I don't want your new moon festivals, Isaiah 1. Like, except God said in Leviticus and Exodus that God did want new moon festivals and did want fasts. So like, why would Isaiah be something different? Except that the prophets keep saying, I don't want that because I want something bigger, deeper. I want justice. I want care for the poor. I want love. I want that undergirding everything.
Can I highlight what you're saying? Why
Yes.
I think it's so dynamic? Because when they come out of Egypt, where it's all you are less than human, you are slaves, you are workers, you don't get a day off, there is no rest for you. So we're going to institute Sabbath to remind you that there's a rhythm to this thing. And then we're going to create this set of laws and understanding of how we are going to go about doing this. The laws themselves were transformational about what it meant to be human, because the laws were designed to remind people of their humanity and their connectivity to the earth, their connectivity to each other, their connectivity that when they mess up, it affects other people. It has ramifications beyond just themselves. And so the laws themselves were to be transformational, but then the laws over time became transactional. How do we appease God? Let's do the transactional thing, which is why you get into like Micah 6, where it's like, what do you want? 10,000 rams? Rivers of oil? Our firstborn? What do you possibly want? Transaction, transaction, transaction. We talked about this in episode 4. And yet it's like, no. Do justice. Like, I designed this to be transformational, and you've turned it transactional. And so Isaiah is doing the transformational thing and saying, stop with the transactional. And here Jesus is saying, stop. Like, you forgot. These people are not the problem. They're the ones in need of transformation. And guess what? So are you, right? So are you. You're in need of transformation too. That's what it means to be human, not transactional.
Well, I think that gets to a bit of like how we live out our faith depends a bit on like what we think God is like. So do we think that God is this righteous God that is demanding righteousness from everybody in response to reflecting that image of God in the world, and like we better follow all the rules? Or do we see God as having a character that's more broad than that? And part of where this idea of chesed comes from is Exodus 34:6, where in Exodus 34, when they are coming out of the wilderness, Moses is sort of trying to grapple with like, but what are you like, God? Like, who is the God that we're following? What's the foundation for all of this? They're having all these conversations on Mount Sinai. Moses declares, like, ask God to see God's glory. And God's like, okay, slow your roll, Moses. Like, that's a lot, but I'll show you my goodness. And then in verses 6 and 7, is describing that goodness, like who is God, who is the living presence. The living presence passes before Moses and proclaims, the living presence, God, merciful, rahum, that's this word for mercy that has that idea of wombing that I think we've talked about in the podcast before, and gracious, hanan, long suffering. Actually, there's like a word for nostrils, like a long, anyway, we could do another study on that one. But then it's abundant in chesed and truth. Like, God's declaring what God is like, and nowhere in that does it say vindictive. Nowhere in that does it say having standards you can't reach. The language that God is declaring is, I am merciful, I am gracious, I am patient, I am with you. Now go and do likewise is sort of the implied, like, that's what the law is for, is to help you do that. And so if you aren't living that way, then you're missing the point of the law. It was never, I'm not a checklist God. I'm a compassionate and gracious and chesed God.
It kind of strikes me that it feels like a lot of what the Bible is doing is it's trying to help humanity be more mature. Because sometimes when I'm interacting with my kids and I want them to like do something that is like, just like, do something nice for the family, like take out the garbage, right? And it's like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, okay, but we need to. I'll just take the consequence. And it's like, what? Like, just be a better human, please. Like, just be a better human right now. Just, can you just be a better human? Like, think about how this affects all the rest of us. Just like, I know it's a small thing, but like, yeah, it's a little bit of a cost to you, but it's not a big deal. It's going to help all of us. You want the trash taken out. I want the trash taken out. We all want the trash taken out. Can you please not just say, well, what's the consequence? And I feel like that's what a lot of humanity does, is it's like, okay, what's the consequence? Do I want to avoid it? Is it fine to accept it? Or what does it mean to actually be transformed and to like go, what would be the thing that would help all of this flourish? Oh, look, the trash is full. Let's take it out. Oh, look, there's somebody in prison. Can I go visit them? There's somebody that needs clothing. Can I clothe them? There's someone that's hungry. Can I feed them? There's someone that's lonely. Can I befriend them? Like, suddenly you're living a transformed life where you're showing up to people in a way that actually flourishes the situation, as opposed to, well, if I don't help them, what's the worst that's going to happen?
Which,
And it's
if we
like,
go to Hosea 6, where Jesus is quoting from, it has some of that language, because in Hosea 6:4, the prophet's saying, "O Ephraim, what should I do to you? O Judah, what shall I do? For your chesed is like a morning cloud, as early dew that goes away." Like, you're not sticking with the things. You're like, it's there, but it goes away. It's light. It's like the morning dew. But what I desired was the chesed over the sacrifice. Like, you're missing it. But it's not there at all. It's just like,
it's there when you want it,
mhm.
but it's not who you are.
So the idea of chesed, just to define it, we've talked about it on this podcast before, but just as we keep talking about it for those who haven't listened to those episodes, I think it came up in the Ruth podcast. It's come up at other times, but it's this idea of this committed and loyal love. King James often translates it as loving kindness. And I do actually think it's interesting to think about things like loving kindness meditations that are part of Buddhism as a part of what it is to have chesed, because loving kindness meditations, you are consciously wishing good upon yourself and upon your neighbor and those you love, and also upon those you struggle with. Like, that's what a loving kindness meditation is doing. And that chesed is a similar idea of like, I will show loving kindness to all. And not based on anything you do for me or give back to me, but because that's the kind of person I am in the world, based on the kind of God I follow, is I'm a person who shows kindness and grace and love, no matter who you are, that I'm like, no matter what you give back to me. And so it is an unconditional sort of force, and that is very action based. So it's also not a feeling kind of love. It is an action based. That's why I do like the idea of kindness, because that kind of is starting to get at the action a little bit. I'm going to do good things for you,
Mm-hmm.
and expect nothing,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what God is like. And that's what I'm going to choose to be like. And that's what God is asking for in Hosea 6:6. Not that that's like the morning dew that goes away because it's conditional, because if it's conditional, it's not chesed. Like, it can't go away. It can't be the morning dew that goes away. It has to stay. That's a part of what it is. It's a long-suffering, patient, ever-present kindness.
Mm.
Lisa, you looked like you were going to say something, and then I kept talking.
No, it's okay. No, I like I think it's easy to talk about the concept of chesed. And I think that moving in the world with that is, it's like what's necessary. But it's actually not super, I don't know. This is where, like, I have a lot of questions about, like, my preference is actually to do the chesed, but I sometimes get a little bit sidetracked with wondering about, like, but what if things don't change? Like, does that mean, like, if I show chesed to people who are doing horrific things to other people, does that make that okay?
Mm.
Like, how do we hold, like, accountability and hope for change and things that deeply matter? while also like moving in the world in the way that we're supposed to be moving. Um,
Yeah, I don't think
I don't know.
chesed
Yeah.
means lack of accountability, because if this is a character trait of God that's being modeled for us, there is a way that a part of the prophets is also over and over again telling the people, you have screwed up. Like, you can't keep living the way you're living. But that is also chesed, because what is not conditional is the relationship piece. Like, I'm going to call you out, but I'm also going to stay in relationship with you.
You know, I once heard, Lisa, you've always brought up the idea of abolition for the prison system, and I'll bring it up this time. I think what's challenging is, with the system that we currently have, if somebody does something to another person that is violent or harmful, um, we naturally think, okay, even if we want to believe that the best is still possible for that person, that they made a mistake, that they that they aren't labeled whatever they did murderer, but they are a person who committed murder, that they're still coming back from that, that there's still redemption possible. The question then becomes, well, okay, well, there still has to be a consequence, or we still have to recognize that maybe this person isn't ready to be placed back into a setting where that could happen again. But we have a punitive system that needs to be abolished because it's not actually transformative. It's only punitive, and it's only actually more harmful than good. And so what else? That's where I think the idea of, like, okay, we have to abolish this system, but it doesn't mean we don't have a system. It just means that we have to dream of something better, dream of something new, dream of something that we maybe not have thought of yet, that has the ability to actually be Hesed, right? Like, for people that have made choices that have hurt others, and I'll never forget. And I mean, if I ever run for office and this gets clipped, I'm probably going to lose votes, but that's fine. I'll never because right, the abolition conversation is not a popular one, which is fine. I love that we talk about this over and over and over, because I think it's so important. I'll never forget listening to an interview on CNN, and someone was like, "We need to do away with the prison system, and what we need is a therapeutic approach for all the people that have committed crimes." Like, there are people that need help, and we need to supply them the help they need so that they can have an opportunity to recognize the harm that they've caused, and then take steps necessary to reconcile with what they've done, and to actually be invited back into community when they're ready, as they're ready. And I was like, a therapeutic approach to the prison system. I was like, that's not commonly talked about. And it was like, okay, that's that's new. Like, that's creative. And of course it just got like poo-pooed like by the rest of the panel, like, you're crazy, like the voters will never go for it. And it's like, yeah, but the voters aren't thinking about the person in the prison, they're thinking about their kid who could be the next victim. That's what they're thinking about. So your
Well, I
mind
wonder if that's like highlighting, like, what if chesed and even the accountability that is still a part of chesed when God shows it to us? What if the question is, who is it for? That is a
Mhm.
part of what determines whether it's chesed or not. So if it is for my sake that I want that person to be punished, that's not chesed.
Right.
If it is for their sake that I want them to learn a better or different or more generative way of being in the world, and it actually does benefit them, it's not just my opinion, like, I'm not phrasing that quite right, then that's closer to chesed. And I
It's
wonder if there's
closer, but Hesed also incorporates reciprocity. I mean, right? It's like, we're in relationship. We're not in, like, top down. I'm going to educate you so that you can maybe one day, like, get a little bit closer to the rest of us, and then we'll maybe kind of invite you in a little bit here and there, but not, you don't get to vote. Don't worry. Like, you know, instead it's like reciprocal. Like, one of the things that I found out during COVID, when the shit hit the fan and life was really challenging with kids being home and work from home. And it was just, I realized that I had some really dark stuff in my soul. I was thinking some very not kind things about what I wanted to do in order to try to make my circumstances better. And I'm not going to go into the details of that. All I'm going to say is that I thought some thoughts that I was like, oh, if I lived out those thoughts, they should lock me up for a really long time. I didn't know that was in there. If I had a reciprocal relationship, I could have learned that a lot sooner than having to experience what I did. Because there's things that we need to learn from each other about the nature of being human that we are not open to, because we don't think we have anything to learn from certain people. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, and reciprocity is certainly a part of it. I mean, in some of the work we call it like it's about like having a friend. Because for some folks, actually, that is the most critical thing, is having one person who says, I'll visit you, I'll see you, I'll talk to you. Because for some folks who are incarcerated, they've never had a visitor. They've never had anybody come in or communicate with them. And that kind of like that matters. And again, it's like, and like the therapeutic approach, I think, is one of the things that acknowledges in some ways how we get there. And I try to hold both, like, because like there's like, this is a bigger conversation than just folks who are incarcerated, because we also have folks who are impacted by the violence or harm. And I think of I think part of the things in our community. So if you're a person who's like, I can't even talk about the prison system, then let's talk about like how to care for folks who have been a victim of a crime. And what does it mean to help them towards like wholeness and healing and wellness? And how do we support them? So like, if you can't do the one side, do the other side, at least, of like thinking about what does it mean to help folks like navigate those things and like be supportive of those things. Because the system doesn't do it. Like the system is not the answer. Community is the answer. People are the answer to it. That's what
I think that's really getting at the dynamic of Chesed really beautifully, to say, sacrifice allows us to be distant. We go to the temple, we do a thing, we go home. Chesed requires relational engagement with the people around us, and all sorts of different people in all sorts of different ways, to say, how did they get where they are? Which is a part of maybe why this is tied to Jesus calling Matthew. Like, he saw Matthew as a human who, if we were Matthew, we might have ended up at the same tax collector's booth. If we had lived the life that Matthew had led, being a tax collector would have made sense to us. And how is Chesed that? Like, if we would have lived the life that the Pharisees lived, what they're saying here would make sense to us. If we had lived the life that whoever these other sinners had lived, what they're doing would make sense to us. And so Chesed requires relationship and connection and engagement and kindness to learn, and to then be people who can change our minds, which is what repentance again is. Let's be people who can change our minds and be in relationship and be healed through what Jesus is offering through that table. Jesus is tying together the idea of chesed over sacrifice with the idea of calling people to change their minds. And to me, that sort of ties together this question of, in order to be a person who shows chesed in my life and learns what that means, what or who do I need to change my mind about?
This has been a 40 Orchards podcast. At 40 Orchards, our mission is to create circles for all people to wrestle through biblical text so that together we can expand each other's experience of what is sacred, whole, and good. We search through the lens of sacred possibility, assuming there is more to be discovered, questioned, and applied as we listen for how God is still speaking. You can learn more about 40 Orchards and sign up for a study by going to 40orchards.org. Our opening music is by Less FM. Our closing music is by NCR Music Vibes. Additional music is by 3 Music. Any references to books or other sources can be found in the show notes of this episode. Thank you for searching the sacred.